gonna be without faces.
Yes. Okay, so Jakub Mroczkowski, making life easier with macros.
So thank you very much. And as you heard, my name is Jakub. I started programming, give me a second. I started programming more than 10 years ago. Around 6 years ago, I started having great time with Rust. After rage quitting C++, and around a year ago, I got my first ever professional job as a programmer. And until before that, I started working on both projects which I want to show you today, which are Easy SQL and Easy Macros. But before I will show you them, I want to do a little intro for those who aren't used to working on and making procedural macros. So in Rust, we have three types of procedural macros. First of them are the function-like. You have probably used them before. For example, as you see here, format. There's also commonly used printline, which function-like macros use their input and transform it into, and the entire macro invocation is replaced with the output generated by the macro. There are also the ref-like macros, which are generally used to automatically implement traits for our type, for our enum. And all of the items you see here used in the derif are separate derif macros, and also they're generally used for auto-implementing traits, but they don't have to be just used for that. They can do other things, but just don't forget to make some doc comments, maybe. There are also attribute macros, which convert the item they get. For example, this entire item. This entire function, and used in example Tokyo main attribute wraps the entire block in a Tokyo runtime, which allows us to use async on a program entry point, so you don't have to do it by hand. Kind of useful. Then also, let's talk about why and when you should use them. First of all, when you have some specific repetitive code which can't really be turned into functions, maybe they have some specific conditions which don't allow for that. Some specific differences. There also maybe have some specific rules outside of your code base, and maybe they're inside of a code base, but they will change in the future quite often. They are also useful for that. Maybe you have some just ugly code in your code base, which you think that it would be nicer if it wasn't visible. So you can also use procedural macros for that. You can of course also auto-implement traits, and maybe you think that Rust is not restrictive enough and you want to perform additional checks on your code, for example for debug purposes and additional safety reasons. Also, if you're new to making procedural macros, you will probably use AI to make them. So let's talk about some potential tips which you can use in your code when crafting your agents. And one of the common problems which I've noticed when working with AI is that there tends to be a lot of going on in a single file. For example, I asked it to create a program. I added a special structure expert to fix this issue. What I didn't tell it specifically to break it down to multiple files. So it didn't. Everything was in the made file, in the main file. So yeah, it's kind of not easy to read. Also, in the older models, AI tended to add a lot of comments, and in the newer ones, it tends to do completely the opposite. While it's commonly expected, we commonly expect that when we ask AI to work on our code, problems start to, let's say, it lowers the readability of code when we work with technologies which we didn't use before. So yeah, I recommend asking AI to explicitly add more comments. Also, AI tends to not use common libraries for procedural macros. For example, use strings instead of the quote library, which allows us to write actual Rust code instead of strings and use the syntax highlighting for them. Now, let's get back a little bit the previous presentation. So, have anyone here used Diesel, SQLX, or any other SQL library in Rust? There's progress since last presentation. So I want to do a little introduction to Easy SQL with a comparison. So first up we have a Diesel code, and first thing which we might notice is that give me a moment. I want to just check one thing. Yeah, as I thought. Sorry about that.
A few moments later.
Okay, now the presentation started. So, in Diesel, we have to import our example table fields to operate on it, which is kind of not ideal. It would be nice if you don't have to do that. Also, we have to use the type which we want to get from the table. Use it twice, here and here. Not ideal. It would be nice to not do that. We also have to use this filter, and to operate on the rows of the table, we have to use functions like greater than, less than, equals. I think it could be more readable. And then we have SQLX code. It fixes some of the problems, but also adds new ones. Like, for example, those quotes. I think we can remove them. We also have to select by hand which columns we want from the table. Also, we have to use question marks to use bindings in our query. Not ideal. Then, now let's look at Easy SQL code here. So I removed the quotes. So now we can use built-in syntax highlighting from our IDEs. And as you see, it's even present in this presentation. Wow. And we can also use bindings. We can insert bindings right into the presentation, into the query. So I solved a bit of problems, I hope. And for those who were on the last presentation, you might have noticed that it looked a little bit of different before. For example, we used those table insert, table select functions to operate on our table. Also before, we had a lot of more structures, which with the new systems are absolutely unneeded. And now we have more macro code. I also added support for SQL functions, which was not present before. There are some built-in functions. We have also a macro which allows us to use custom SQL functions, which are not present generally. Also, in our last presentation, migration system was required, and now it's optional. So you don't have to use it, of course. I also added customization of columns which we get from the select statement, and there is, of course, more, which you can find in the documentation of this library, which was fully developed. Every feature is fully documented. Now, let's do a little demo before we get to the good stuff. First of all, we of course define tables which we want to operate on from our database. We define them like this by creating structures using a table deriv macro. Next up, when we have all of the tables defined, we use I'm sorry, I forgot about one thing. So, first of all, you can of course add attributes to our tables to make it to modify the behavior of our table create function. For example, this primary key, maybe you want a different name for the table, also supported, and maybe you want migrations, just like it. Now we have migrations. We just added new columns, then change the number, and the migrations are automatically created. Next up, when we have all of the tables defined, then we create a structure representing a part of our database. And then we can define structures defining our output, updates, etc. Here you have the example output with a custom column selected from the database. And here we use query-like syntax from SQL to define what data we want. Next, we can use all of those structures and call them from our program. First up, we of course have to do some setup. We use the structure representing our entire database, which we want to work on here. It can be also a table. This, for example, is using SQLite, so we just define the file which we want to work on. Then we get a connection, and with all of that, we can perform our first query, which can look like this. Now, let's get into our first error, which I've met while developing the older version of this library. So, this one occurred because I had a type which had inside of it lifetime, and the Rust wanted it to fulfill 2 lifetimes, but I only wanted it to fulfill 1 lifetime, and that was the main issue. So this is the actual error, and everything else just, you can say, noise caused by the type. Also, you can meet a little bit easier version of this error in your code, like this, with this line, which tells us what to do when we have 2 external lifetimes. But in my code, it wouldn't be even useful, unfortunately. I had to fix this error with, maybe before I get to how I fixed it, maybe I will show you what code caused it. First of all, this code gets our builder. It uses transmutation, which you generally shouldn't do that, to transform the lifetime of our builder. Then it's caused because Rust thinks that it can be tied forever to this O type, to, I'm sorry, not to this O type, to the query which we get, because because of internals of the driver, the types used by it, which this problem didn't happen when driver wasn't generic, when I had only support for SQLite, but now because it has some internal types using lifetimes, it's kind of, I'm sorry, it's now thinks that a bad driver can borrow everything forever, which was the main issue. Next, with our builder and with our builder and SQL present, we can convert it with the help of our type into an actual query with a builder inside, which is not built yet, as you can see. We also have used transmute to make compiler not bad at me for borrowing the builder forever.
So what does this transmute does? What does it do, this transmute?
So generally it's used to transmute one type with the same size to the other type with the same size. When you try to convert one type to a type with a different size, RS will throw a compile error. Yeah, that's the main purpose. But it also, as you can see, convert lifetimes.
So we can convert lifetimes, yes, with it.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe you can use it when you don't have time to redesign code, and then you have, for example, a tight deadline. So, next with all of this, we can use a support type of our output, which represent a SQL row, to convert our query and get the actual row from the database. And then, with all of that, we can get the actual type we want. Also, I forgot to mention, this code was present in the connection type used by this library. So, what you can learn from this? First of all, as I already said, you can use transmute in tight situations. But other than that, generics with lifetimes inside can cause issues. So I recommend to keep it in the back of your head when designing code. And yeah, both me and Copilot had quite a great time with this one. And I think that's all. Let's get to the next one. Now, we have a compiler instruction loop, and this is actually the easy version of this error, which is this error was caused by one trait extending another trait, and the other trait was also extending the first trait, which is kind of simple. If you don't have to
extend traits.
I mean, by extending by depend on it, we use the double dot on the trait name, and then we specify the other trait.
Okay.
I hope I used the right name. So, this error was also quite a bit longer, which you have seen, which is also the easier one. Now let's look at the actual error. The reproduction of it. I tried to get back into the old code and get the exact one, but I think it was already fixed in the compiler. So, the error which I had looked like this. And the other one, of course, was mentioning the actual parts of the code, and the one that I had didn't, which, yeah, doesn't make things easy. and all I get is information about links which will tell me how compiler works. Thank you very much. I hope it will be useful. Now let's look at the code which caused the issue, which was this. In all of this code, the actually problematic part is this, which compiler told me when I try to reproduce it lately. There were not enough constraints in the workflows. That's it. That's the only cause of the error. And I guess at the time, compiler tried to find a way to satisfy all of the types missing here, but it took him so long that it looped. So it gave up and it gave me just a generic error from the compiler. So yeah, also, I'm sorry about that. Now, at the time I fixed it by using macros, and more exactly macro rules. It's not ideal solution, but it worked, and it still works. So what you can learn from this one, that I should have probably reported this error at the time to the Rust repository, but I didn't. If you find a similar one, I recommend you to do that. But you also can wait. There's a chance that it will be fixed in the future. Maybe find a workaround like this. And we of course can use macro rules to imitate actual functions. Now, let's get into next error. This one is from a newer version of the library, and it happened after the release. And it's kind of weird because it expects us, because it tells us that send does not implement some specific lifetime O. But when we look at the actual implementation of send for the reference of string, we see that there is no lifetime. And this error happened when I placed the query in Tokyo spawn, which of course it will be probably used like this in the future. So instead of abandoning, I started digging and found out that the issue was not a lifetime at all, but actually it was caused by trait with async functions, which didn't have with output not implementing send, and Tokyo spawn requires pretty much send everywhere from the async functions. And the culprit looked like this. Looks like this. This is a trait implemented for row types, which are used internally by the output trait of this library. And of course, here we have async, and the fix is quite easy. Just like that, we used async trait to fix the issue. There were also other traits with async inside, but they were more used for setting up the database and migrations, which you generally shouldn't do in the middle of your code. So they will probably not be used inside of a Tokyo spawn. So yeah, I hope now you know what causes this issue in the future when you will maybe meet it. Next up, let's jump into easy macros, and more exactly into always context, procedural attribute. With the main goal of this attribute is to convert is to provide additional context data in our functions without us having to add it manually. And the function which you see here will be converted by always context into this. It's using anyhow internally to provide the additional context. Also, if the example function had more inputs, it would be also added here inside of the context. And what the issue is when you use it inside of a build, you will see this. Inside of a build script. And so I started digging, and first thing which I've noticed is that here you have a part of our code which handles question marks internally, and you might have noticed this part of code which also has the abort keyword which you have seen in the error. So yeah, this is the function causing the issue. Its purpose is to replace the entirety of this expression without creating additional copy, which is not fully safe. That's why we're using a library for it. And I thought when making this code that this function will, just in case of panic, just crash with actual and return the actual panic error. But as you have seen, it doesn't. It just crashes everything. So yeah, now let's get into the actual culprit that panics inside of this, which is this piece of code. Because here you have a find create list function from Easy Macros library, which uses Easy Macros create internally. I'm sorry, there's also library after this name. It's kind of a weird library name, but it works. It's used to find the create in our dependency list. And you might notice this panic right here. It happened because our internal implementation support create didn't look into the build dependencies. So with this we can use. So having this information, now it's planned to, so I will temporarily replace this panic and just assume that you are using Easy Macros. It will solve the issue. And of course, in this situation, we should create an issue in the internal create, which is used.
Is always context, is it your creates attribute, or is it something that comes from the other creates?
Yeah, always context is a part of Easy Macros.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this is the creator of the macros that you have implemented, yeah?
Yes, exactly. So I've replaced this panic. So I've looked for and of course somebody else already created the issue for this 5 years ago. So we can also try to look deeper into the create which I've used. Maybe create a potential fix for this, looking also in build dependencies. But I'm sorry, to allow the creator of this create to look into this issue again with pretty much a ready implementation and make life easier for him. I'm sure they will like it. Maybe they will not merge the PR, but there is a chance. And that's all that I wanted to show you today. Thank you very much for your time. If you would like some additional feature in Easy SQL on Easy Macros, I'm happy to help. You can DM me on Discord if you want to, and I will try my best to implement it. Thank you very much.